We are now making it clear to China that after years of targeting our industries and stealing our intellectual property, the theft of American jobs and wealth has come to an end.
Did China steal America's jobs? It's a claim that's been tossed around for years, especially when the US economy took a hit during the rise of global outsourcing. The narrative often goes like this. China, with its low wages and massive factories, swooped in and grabbed millions of jobs right from under America's nose. But is that really the full story? Is China really the villain in this tale? Or is there more to the picture than just cheap labor and trade wars? Well, here's the twist. It's not as simple as blaming one country for America's job losses. The truth is, the story of global manufacturing is far more complicated than we're often led to believe. Sure, China played a role, but automation, globalization, and corporate decisions had just as much of an impact. So, did China steal those jobs, or did something else happen behind the scenes? Let's take a closer look at the real reasons behind America's job losses and why China isn't the only one to blame. China's economic rise. Not a sneaky heist, but a global shift. Let's start by giving China a little credit. For years, China has been the world's manufacturing powerhouse. And why? Simple. Cheap labor, yes, but also the massive investments in infrastructure and technology. From highways to ports, China built the kind of manufacturing ecosystem that made it the go-to destination for companies looking to lower their production costs. In the 1990s, US companies started moving their factories overseas, and guess where they went? Yup, China. Companies like Nike, Apple, and General Motors saw the potential in China's labor force where wages were a fraction of what they were in the US. It wasn't China stealing jobs, it was just basic economics, businesses chasing profits. In fact, according to data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost in the US between 2000 and 2010. And guess where many of those jobs went? China. But hold on, that's not the whole story. Here's the kicker. As China gained global influence, its role wasn't just about cheap labor. It also became a major trading partner and a giant market for US exports. In fact, while some jobs went to China, China's booming middle class began buying more American products. So were all those job losses really China's fault? Maybe not, but we'll get to that. The US trade deficit. Who's really to blame for the job losses? Now, let's talk about the trade deficit. You've probably heard it all before. China is accused of flooding the US market with cheap goods, leading to a $300 billion plus trade deficit. The US imports a ton of stuff from China, but it doesn't export as much back. This, of course, is a huge problem, right? Except here's where things get a bit interesting. See, the US doesn't blame itself for having one of the largest consumer markets in the world. Americans love buying things, tons of things, and they often prefer cheap, mass-produced goods. So while China happily supplied affordable electronics, clothing, and furniture, the US consumer was all too eager to gobble it up. But, of course, it's easier to blame China than to look at the fact that American consumers wanted all those cheap products. China didn't force US companies to outsource manufacturing. No one had a gun to their head. Companies like Apple didn't relocate their production to China because they were bullied into it. They went because it made business sense. And let's not forget that companies are in the business of making money. When you can make a cheap iPhone in China for a fraction of what it would cost in Michigan, why wouldn't you? And speaking of companies like Apple, let's be real for a second. The trade deficit was a direct result of US companies' business decisions, not some evil scheme by China to steal American jobs. Automation and globalization, the unseen culprits. Alright, so China played a role in manufacturing jobs moving abroad. But if you think that's the only reason US jobs disappeared, you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. The biggest culprit in the decline of US manufacturing wasn't just cheap Chinese labor. No, it was automation and the rise of globalization. We've all heard about the robots taking over jobs, right? Well, guess what? It's not just China. Automation has been erasing jobs in manufacturing for years. Machines are faster, more efficient, and way cheaper than hiring a human. In fact, between 1997 and 2007, the number of manufacturing jobs in the US dropped by 2 million, and automation was responsible for a large chunk of that. The simple fact is that robots don't need lunch breaks, and they definitely don't ask for healthcare. Then there's globalization. It's a nice buzzword, but at its core, it means that companies can find cheap labor anywhere. It wasn't just China taking jobs. It was countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India all trying to get in on the action. In fact, in the past few years, some companies have moved their factories from China to Vietnam to escape the trade war tariffs. So now we're blaming China for stealing jobs, but Vietnam is doing the same thing, taking over what China once had. Did China blame Vietnam for stealing its jobs? Not at all. Instead, China upgraded its value chain and began focusing on high-tech manufacturing. So let's face it, if you're looking to place the blame on China alone for the loss of manufacturing jobs in the US, you're ignoring automation and the broader trend of outsourcing to low-cost countries around the globe. The US-China trade war, did it actually bring jobs back? Here's where the plot thickens. The US-China trade war, launched under President Trump, was supposed to bring all those jobs back. Tariffs were slapped on Chinese goods to encourage companies to reshore their operations to the US. But what really happened? Let's break it down. For starters, a lot of companies didn't move back to the US because of tariffs. Instead, they just shifted production to other countries, like Vietnam or Mexico. That's right. Instead of bringing jobs back to America, the trade war simply pushed them to other low-cost countries that didn't face the same tariffs. According to a 2021 report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the US-China trade war cost the US economy an estimated $100 billion annually in lost economic output, along with the disruption of global supply chains. As for the jobs, well, while a few companies did bring some production back to the US, they didn't create a significant number of new jobs. In fact, many of the jobs that returned were automated or technology-driven. So while the US government was busy blaming China, countries like Vietnam and Mexico quickly stepped up to take China's place in the supply chain. Talk about a classic case of be careful what you wish for. China's shift to high-tech manufacturing, the end of low-cost labor? Now, here's where China deserves a round of applause. Over the past few decades, China has made a dramatic shift from being a low-cost manufacturing hub to a center of high-tech innovation. And guess what? It's no longer focusing on the same industries that were once responsible for stealing those US jobs. In fact, China's new goal is to become the global leader in high-tech industries like AI, robotics, and green energy. China is investing heavily in research and development, and it has already surpassed the US in areas like 5G technology and electric vehicles. So, if anything, China's move up the value chain means it no longer competes in the same industries where US jobs went to China in the first place. The days of cheap labor in China are slowly fading away. While the US was busy blaming China for its own job losses, China was busy reinventing itself as a leader in advanced manufacturing. And now it's less about cheap products and more about cutting-edge technology. Blame China or blame the system? In the end, China didn't steal American jobs. It just played by the rules of global economics. Yes, the US lost jobs to China, but it wasn't just China's fault. Automation, globalization, and corporate decisions all played a huge role. And let's not forget that American consumers were the ones happily buying up all the cheap products China was making. So before we point fingers and say China stole our jobs, maybe we should look in the mirror and ask ourselves how much of the blame rests on US corporations, consumer habits, and the bigger forces of automation and globalization. China's no longer just a low-cost manufacturer. It's now a global tech leader, and the US might want to take notes. So what do you think? Do you agree with our video? Share your thoughts and leave your comments below. If you like what you watched, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos.